and welcome to North American Ag Spotlight. I'm Chrissy Wozniak. Today, we're tackling one of the hottest topics in agriculture and energy, biofuels. With pressure growing around renewable energy and the rapid development of sustainable aviation fuels, producers and agribusinesses are facing new challenges and opportunities in feedstocks, investments, and policy. My guest today brings 2 decades of experience in ag policy, biofuels, trade, and farm management. She's the lead economist for Farm Supply and Biofuels at CoBank, where she provides in-depth market insights through their knowledge exchange research division. She'll also be moderating an important panel on this topic in September at the Women in Agribusiness Summit in Orlando, Florida, on biofuels investment trends and how aviation fuel adoption will shape the feedstock market. From Fredericktown, Ohio, I would like to welcome Jacqui Fatka. Welcome, Jacqui, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So let's start. Can you start by telling us about your role at CoBank, a bit of your history, and the areas that you focus on in the Knowledge Exchange Division?
Absolutely. So I joined the CoBank team actually in January of 2024, and have loved being able to serve on the Knowledge Exchange team, which is a group of economists and analysts, and each of us have a different segment that we are focused on and watching. And I get to watch the biofuel space and the farm supply side of the ag economic picture, as well as sustainability fits in with both of those categories as well. So that's kind of the unofficial part of my title as well. A lot going on in the sustainable space within the ag industry. So I work with our customers, our internally within our bank to help educate those in our bank, our relationship managers, as they are working with their customers, better understanding trends and better understanding the current economic outlook, different regulatory actions, policy actions, a lot going on with the tariffs today, and then also interacting with our customers as well. So doing different board presentations, presenting at meetings. We also have a weekly newsletter that I help put together every week to help kind of keep our pulse on all the different things, all the moving pieces in the industry. Which works out really well. My past life, I used to be a journalist, actually, so it was kind of similar to you on the other side, asking the questions, and it's always fun now to be on this side and answering some of those questions, but also knowing, too, the best way to make sure that I'm giving the best answers is by knowing the questions to ask, and so a lot of that has really translated easily into this new role as an analyst economist that I have on the Knowledge Exchange team.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and so what inspired that change from ag journalism to becoming an analyst?
It was, one of my big focuses is biofuels, and I've done a lot with ag policy over the years, and biofuels especially is one of those uh, sectors of the ag sector that is so dependent on the policy and the regulations that impact it. And so, it was one of those just crossroads in my career of where this opportunity came up, and really being able to build on all of the knowledge that I gained over 2 decades of covering a lot of these issues, covering a lot of the policy, and being able to challenge myself to step out and do something a little different. I knew I loved to be able to communicate, and so much of what I do now is not only writing, communicating through writing, which is what a lot of what I was doing before, but also putting together presentations that are engaging and exciting, being able to simplify really confusing issues like where we see sustainable aviation fuel, and some of those really complex issues, and simplify them in a way that an audience can understand and be able to learn from what I say. So I feel like I'm still a communicator. I'm just doing it in a little different way, which, if you would have asked me 2 years ago if I would have thought about this, I would have said no way. But now that I've been in it for, coming up almost on 2 years, it has been the best, most fulfilling job change that I could have ever imagined. And, the mission of CoBank and the Farm Credit Administration, we're really able to go out into rural America and see things improve because of the lending that we're able to do. And so there's something so amazing about being able to be part of a bank that has a mission to really fund these things in rural America. We do so much we partner with so many of the grain co-ops around the country. Many of the ethanol plants that started were funded through CoBank. And because of our unique ability to give a really great rate because we're in rural America, it really helps us partner for success in rural America, which is so passionate to me as a farm girl, and currently still live on a small acreage here in Ohio. And so it's just been so fulfilling to be part of the CoBank team.
Amazing. Oh, that's so cool. And so can you break it down for anyone that's not familiar, that maybe is from the livestock space? Um, what crops are you growing and how are you making aviation fuel? What is that process?
Oh, I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question. Are you asking about me, my personal, or?
Just generally. Yeah, generally in the industry. Like where is it coming from? What crops are used?
Yeah, so sustainable aviation fuel today is mostly being produced through the HEFA process, which is the same process that's able to produce renewable diesel. So those would be soybean oil. You do have your waste oils from beef tallow or used cooking oil. What choice white grease is another one. So some of those, as well as canola oil. So more oil based is most of what the very small amount of SAF that's being produced here in the US today is being produced with that process. There's a lot of hope that we could also have the alcohol to jet, which would be, the similar feedstocks that you would have for ethanol being able to be refined in a way that's able to produce the diesel equivalent for sustainable aviation fuel. And we're seeing very small amounts of that now. LanzaJet is one of the facilities that was supposed to be up and running last year. They're still working through some of that, and had been importing some sugar from Brazil to produce that. But again, a lot of this depends on being able to get the carbon intensity score lower. So there's plenty of corn in the US, and being able to get the feedstocks, that's not a problem. But the cost to produce that alcohol to jet for sustainable aviation fuel is much more expensive today. And so that's just why we haven't seen a lot of the plants be able to scale commercially yet. And so that's the important part of being able to make those investments and do the R&D to drive costs down to make alcohol to jet more cost competitive.
I see. Yeah. So, from your perspective, how has this industry evolved over the past decade?
So I kind of go back to when we look at the ethanol industry and we look at the renewable fuel standard, and that was 20 years ago. We're just now celebrating the RFS for 20 years. And people sometimes think, well, that just was born overnight. Well, actually, it was born, 10, 15 years before that, before it kind of boomed overnight. And so, as you fast forward today and where we're at with SAF, I think a lot of people have been hearing a lot about SAF. There's a lot of excitement, but we're still just a drop in the bucket for worldwide use and in domestic production here in the US. Last year we were at 0.17% worldwide use of SAF. So that's, 0.17%. It's pretty small.
Mhm.
We're going to maybe get to 0.3% this year. So again, very small amount when you look at the goals of really increasing that substantially here in the next couple of years. So we've seen some plants that have started to go in, trying out different feedstocks, looking at different opportunities of those feedstocks, cellulosic, canola oil, different types of camelina oil is another one that Minnesota producers are looking at. So we're in a very pre-commercial even. We're not even at pre-commercial. We're, even smaller scale, and we're trying to look at things, figure out, does this work? Can we make this work? And I think that's we've got to be able to get the cost down. And the other thing too, as the cost of oil has gone down, it actually makes it a little less competitive, right? When oil is really expensive, it's
Oh,
actually
right.
easier to motivate, okay, well, how can we maybe decrease the cost by adding a biofuels into the mix, right? So not even just for a climate perspective, environmental reason, but also seeing this as an economic alternative to high oil prices. But oil prices are really low right now. So it's hard to kind of spin that need to invest in the R&D. So, looking back the last
Right.
several years, we've seen some investment. We've worldwide, the EU has implemented a 2% mandate this year. And, that has been an important kind of requirement to try to push those higher inclusion rates, right? We talked about 0.3% worldwide. So if the EU is pushing a 2%, that's a little bit higher. And, there's been US dollars that have tried to incentivize it through a voluntary tax credits. And so we're in a very different stage right now here in the US versus around the world. And some areas like the EU, the UK have these mandates where a lot of others are just trying to take voluntary actions, or companies are stepping up and saying, hey, we want to make this step, make this change. But again, we've got to have the economics that also funnel into that decision for those airlines as well.
Yeah, great points. And then with all of that in mind, where do you see the biggest growth opportunities?
So I like to talk about a three stool approach to being able to support it, because it's hard to get it off the ground if not everybody's kind of working together. So we talked about feedstocks. You've got to have the right feedstock. So is that corn? Is that camelina? Is that canola? Do we need to have varying feedstocks so that you don't put don't put too much pressure on one over another? So feedstock availability is really important. And I think, right now we're doing a lot of R&D to see what is the best feedstock. Can we reduce our costs to get feedstocks as part of that push to get those economics improved, right? Because it costs 2 to 3 times, sometimes 6 times as much to produce SAF compared to just using a regular, your standard diesel that's used today. So, feedstock availability is really important. The other part is, a processor needs to take that feedstock, and that processor may need to be really close to an airport, right? Right now, a lot of the ethanol plants are wherever there is corn. But you think about where we have the most crops, that's actually where we have the least population and maybe not a major airport. So that's a little different than what the plant structure was when we were looking at building the ethanol industry 20 years ago. So, that's why we do see like Minneapolis stepping up. We see Chicago stepping up because those are both hubs, but also in the Midwest. So they would have some access to those feedstocks, those crops availability. And then the final thing is you have to have an offtake agreement. So you can't just make this and then hope for the best that someone's going to buy it. You need to have some kind of agreement or hope or maybe partnership that someone's going to come in and buy that final product. And so it's hard to really say, where do we see the greatest opportunity? I mean, I think you're looking at the last couple of weeks here, we've had a lot of reinforcement that this year's corn crop is going to be huge, right? And, last year, and I was at the Women in Ag conference, I spoke on SAF there as well. I gave a presentation and I showed a chart that really showed where corn was 20 years ago before the RFS. We were leveled at about $2. And so we desperately needed to find a new demand base. And, today I would say most people want the corn to be used for sustainable aviation fuel because we just are able to produce so much of it. It has a very high yield potential. There's hope that we could create this alcohol to jet process that would allow for more ethanol to be refined. Even the corn kernels, from that. I didn't mention this before, but one of the byproducts of the ethanol industry is corn oil. It's able to be used in the HEFA process, which is used, for sustainable aviation fuel. But, another component of this, we are seeing some changing landscape with some of the tax credits. And so that makes it a little, right now, those renewable diesel plants can also produce SAF, but without the tax incentive to kind of tip the needle to the SAF side, they may end up just doing more renewable diesel because they are able to capture a wider profit opportunity with renewable diesel than sustainable aviation fuel if they don't have, a secure agreement with an offtake. So your question was, who has the most to gain? I think there's a lot who have the most to gain, and I think just big picture too, and looking for that saving grace. Sustainable aviation fuel is not something you can turn on overnight and just turn on production and it instantly happens. And I think we've been hearing more about it, and people think that we can just turn on that switch and it's there. And if unfortunately it's not, we're still years out, and without some of the levers, those policy levers to encourage things from the different tax incentives, maybe it's local and state incentives, we're just not going to really see this truly take off the ground and provide that real lift to rural America, and again boost prices. I talked about those $2 corn prices when the RFS was born. We went to $4, but now we're kind of plateaued at $4. And so the question now is, can we get above $4 so that we're not losing money, we're able to bring more revenue back to rural America and just revitalize those rural main streets that we did see that revitalization during that first era of the RFS 20 years ago.
Yeah. Wow. So, and you touched on policy there. Explain what has been happening in policy, and then also what you need to happen. I know you touched on it a little bit, but could you expand on that?
So one big policy lever that was implemented in the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022 was what is now called 45Z, and it's a tax credit not only for SAF but also for on-road fuels. So there was a predecessor, previous tax credit that was also in the IRA, but it was really short-lived because the guidance was introduced in May 2025, and it was a 2024 and May 2024, and it was a 23 and 24 program, but that was just for SAF. The thought was that we could maybe encourage more climate smart ag practices to be able to lower your total carbon intensity score, and getting a tax credit for that. Same with the 45Z. When the Biden administration left office, they did give some guidance that did improve upon that first 40B program. And, just a few parts of that, I think, were important, that it did provide a tax credit based on the carbon intensity score. So if 50 is the threshold, and for every point below 50, you get 2 cents. And so, there's different ways that you can get your CI score lower. It's the energy cost that happens at an ethanol plant. It's the feedstocks that go into it. It's how that feedstock is produced. And so we got a little bit of that guidance from the Biden administration when they left office. And then the Republicans, when they came in with this administration, we've heard a lot of criticism about a lot of these type of programs that they like to call the Green New Deal. But the 45Z was really a environmental focused, a sustainability focused tax credit that did survive and was included in the One Big Beautiful Bill. And I think a big reason for that was because a lot of Republicans in Midwest states really championed the notion that this is a game changer, just like the RFS was. It has the ability to revitalize rural America, add value to crops in the Midwest, or whatever feedstock is chosen. And so they really championed this, and it was carried through. Now, 45Z did get extended, which, from CoBank's perspective, there is some certainty that's added. The original 45Z was only going to be from 2025 through 2027. This did extend it to 2029, which gives us a few more years to test out, make those investments, be able to see that tax credit maybe generate some income. But unfortunately for SAF, they may have been one of the biggest losers because instead of creating a higher tax incentive for SAF, which was in some of the proposals, they actually have the on-road and the sustainable aviation tax credit at the same amount. So again, those HEFA plants today that can run renewable diesel or they can run SAF with the same tax credit, they're going to run renewable diesel likely, even though some of these plants had promised to increase their SAF production. And so, again, just being able to have those levers, this was a lever that did get kind of altered in the final negotiations that may actually limit some of that push to increase SAF production without some other policy lever, or maybe that's an offtake agreement. Again, people have to step in and decide to do that. Sometimes when I present on this, I have a carrot and a stick because people don't like carrots and sticks, or people don't like sticks because a mandate is a stick. It requires you to meet a level. But the RFS is a mandate. It creates a floor, and that was what was needed to kind of get people off the ground. A carrot is only as enticing as and juicy as you make it, right? So if the tax lever, if that credit isn't very enticing, the carrot approach doesn't work in that voluntary system. And so we're going to have to figure out what needs to change if there's different levers. And, if the federal government isn't going to step in and provide some of this policy support, then that's where, we are seeing some states step in on that. Different states are trying to push the use of SAF in their state and having some incentives for that. You look at Minnesota, Illinois, both of those states have tried to encourage that. So, if we don't have a federal level, maybe the states are stepping up, or maybe there's, other industry funds that are going to be able to step in and help kind of encourage some of this. So we're still really, really early in this industry. And I think we have a lot to learn. We're going to have some things that we think we know now that are going to change a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 5 years from now. But that also makes it really exciting. There's new things that are happening. There's new partnerships that are coming together. And that's really important too, to keep an ongoing dialogue with all these different people within the supply chain.
Yeah. Wow, what a complex, coming into this interview, I wasn't thinking about how complex it is, and it's really incredible to learn more about this whole world. Um, how do you think that SAF adoption um, will change the demand for traditional feedstocks like corn, soy, and others?
You look at I'm going to go back to the RFS because that's kind of more of what we have today that we could mimic something off of. And even though it's a mandate, the renewable diesel market is now feeding into the RFS category of the biomass-based diesel. And there's been some criticism the last couple of years that mandate was set at such a level that it didn't really force this higher usage. Well, they did propose, EPA did propose what would be potentially for 2026 and 2027, and they substantially increased what that biomass-based diesel level would be, which in turn, as well as limiting the value that would be created for imported feedstocks. Bottom line, this could have a huge boost in soybean oil demand. The same thing could be said for if we figure out a process that is the most economical, or we figure out a feedstock that we're able to run more efficiently, that is also able to have a lower CI score that, can get those higher tax credits. It could create definite push to use more of that particular feedstock, like soy oil, as I said. But camelina oil is also not necessarily used regularly in a traditional corn. That's not a crop that we know much about. But there's a lot who are trying to find different crops that you can plant in the off seasons, right? Throughout the winter, where you might harvest it before you plant your regular crop. Is there we've had a lot of talk about cellulosic over the years. Are we able to use some of that waste cellulose that is created with the stalk or created with wheat stubble? Different types of feedstocks that maybe don't have much of a value now. And so that's why I think right now we're still figuring it out. We're still trying to figure out what's the best feedstock. But if I was putting money on it today, soy oil, because it's used in the HEFA process, the way that they are trying to encourage more domestic feedstocks, soy oil is one that we do have the ability to have more of. But when we split a bean, we get oil and we get soybean meal. So you have two different products that come out of that soybean when you crush it. And although we do have a lot of demand for the oil because of biofuels, we may have a glut of soybean meal, because even though our livestock producers do want that meal for their animals, that's a lot in the poultry and the swine diets, hogs. We're not using all of that right now. We have a lot of excess meal. And if we push our biofuels use so much, then we're going to have this meal that's just sitting there, or we're dumping it on the world market. So it's hard to push one feedstock way over without having something for that other one. Now, when you take a corn kernel to an ethanol plant, they use that whole thing, and they do have DDGs that come out of that, but it's not quite the same. It's a lower ratio of the portion of the margin for a crusher. The soybean crusher depends on both that meal and that oil, and a ethanol plant, they do want to sell that DDG, but it's not quite as impactful of a glut on the market like we're seeing within the soybean meal. So again, we got to figure out this market. There's all these little nuances that you can't just turn it on and turn it off and everything works out perfectly. So there's going to be some learning curves. There's going to be industries that are going to be upset with other ones. And, I really don't want to go back to that food versus fuel versus feed debate, because we lived that, we saw that. But that's the other thing too. We use a lot of soybean oil for cooking. And if we are using that, not in the food sector, but we're using it in the biofuels, does that have an impact on food prices to be able to have a sustainable fuel? And is that really the right trade-off that we want to have too? And those are all things that are being discussed now.
Wow, great insight on that. So for producers that are thinking of ramping up to this, um, is there a way for them to start making decisions, in terms of acres, crop rotations, anything they can do now?
I'd say the biggest thing, farmers are faced with making sure that they have a buyer for their crop, right? Whether that's corn or soybeans, or whatever they may try. So if they're going to look at maybe doing, I think there are more, I mentioned the camelina producers up in Minnesota that are doing some testing there. Different industry groups are also working with farmers. And so I think that's one really powerful opportunity for farmers. Stay engaged with your commodity groups, stay engaged with finding out what they're doing to advocate for changes in policy. Another thing that helps prepare farmers for maybe participating in this market is really capturing some of the data on what farm practices you're doing on your farm. And, is there value that can be obtained through a premium? And maybe that's a sustainable market. There is an opportunity maybe for a couple cent premium, or, maybe 20 cents premium at an ethanol plant if they're able to get their 45Z tax credits and pass some of that on to producers. But there's companies out there that are helping to provide that third party verification. So if you do need to be able to verify what you're doing on farm, and that's also going to be important if you're working with a CPG company that is looking to capture sustainability metrics and being able to pay a premium for that. So I do still believe that there's going to be some opportunities in that for farmers. The how much of the premium, we're still figuring that out. But a lot of this data farmers already have. So it's just a matter of making sure that it's verified and maybe working with a trusted partner. Sometimes your local ag retailers, a lot of our CoBank customers are also, working with their farmers to capture that information, and then it's there and available if they may need to use it going forward. So I think that's one thing. And, at the end of the day, just stay educated. This is one of those issues that is really moving, changing a lot. A lot of times I say there's a lot of hype when it comes to SAF and hope, but we've got to be able to really have a good grounded understanding of what's needed today, and being able to be part of an organization, the commodity groups who are advocating for the possibility of continuing investment. Because if we keep pushing off investment, it's going to keep pushing off that return, right? Because we can't capture any of that value if we're not researching it now, figuring out what works and what doesn't, and maybe using those different policy levers to help advocate for what's needed to push that along as well.
Yeah, great points. And what about rural co-ops? Can they help in this shift? Maybe, yeah, in what ways could they be part of this?
So a lot of our agro co-ops are the ones who are helping make the agronomic decisions, whether that's reduced fertilizer use or understanding what no-till is or cover crops, being able to recommend the different practices that can provide a potential lower carbon intensity and final CI score on that farm. So a lot of our agronomists, our CoBank customers have agronomists that are out in the field helping make those decisions with the local farmers. And then also too, we even have some sustainability linked loans. So, one of our ag co-ops has actually a loan through us that they are able to get at a slightly lower rate because they are working with farmers to implement, uh, you know, edge of field practices and no-till and cover crops, and helping educate them as well. And I think there's definitely a role to have for everybody in the ag sector to be educated, and also educate farmers about just what they can do to improve their own economics as well as their environmental sustainability, right? Because sustainability is not just environment, it's also an economic sustainability. But how can you improve your own farm finances by maybe implementing some of these practices as well?
Yeah, for sure. And you hit that on the head too with it's economic. I think a lot of people forget that it's also economic sustainability for the producer. And that's a really important point. So can you give us a preview of your panel discussion, your presentation at Women in Agribusiness Summit?
Yeah, so I am going to be on a panel with someone from Syngenta in GIVO, which is also looking at, if you're not familiar with GIVO, they are also looking to have an alcohol to jet facility, and working with farmers to try to source lower CI corn to be able to create this um, alcohol to jet ethanol, sustainable aviation fuel. And then also someone from the panel will be from Delta as well. So again, talking about the partnerships and, the three pieces of trying to get SAF off the ground. You have to have feedstocks, you have to have a processor, and then you have to have, the offtake agreement with somebody in the space, like a airline company. And so I'm really looking forward to sharing the views. I can't publicly claim any of the news that we might be able to release that day, but I will tell you that we are seeing more and more companies coming together with different people within the industry, and I've had conversations with the different players, and trying to figure out how do we partner together to really help get this off the ground. And I think this is just another really exciting opportunity for everyone at the Women in Ag event to hear where these three companies are trying to do exactly that. So, I'm going to kind of lay the groundwork for some of those, where we are today and where we hope to go, and then, opening it up with them, and talking to them about what they see as challenges and opportunities, where they see the value of these partnerships, and again, how we can all work together to improve rural America.
Amazing. I love it. And my final question today, what is it that lights you on fire? What gets you up in the morning? Why do you do what you do?
Oh, I love rural America. And you caught
Mhm.
me on a day where my son leaves for college tomorrow to go be enrolled in ag business. So I'm technically
Amazing.
one generation removed from farm. I'm a fifth generation. My brother is a fifth generation farmer, and my son hopes to go back to my family farm. So I think for me, um, I've always loved agriculture, and there's something so unique and amazing about those in agriculture. And for me, the fact that I have somehow shared that love and passed that love on to my own son. This field behind me is technically my front yard. So even though we live in the country, we don't get to combine that. And he does, help with the hay across the field sometimes. But, it's, there's something amazing about agriculture, and there's this thread that connects us. I'm really excited to be at Women in Ag again. I was joking around. We have a Denver Divas text chain that I have from about 8 of us who all ended up going out for late night drinks last year. Everybody knew 1 or 2 people, but we all met, a handful of others, and we've continued to have a text chain that we keep up on, and everybody's asking who's going and when they're coming. And, women in ag is also something pretty awesome too. We have this deep love, and I think because women in general just dig deeper sometimes into those relationships and the connections, and that's the great thing about agriculture too. There's connections everywhere. You will meet somebody, and 10 years later you'll see them again, and there's a great circle of friends who become like family in agriculture. So, that's a huge blessing to me too, to be able to do what I do every day and work with some really amazing people at CoBank who work with even amazing people, all throughout the supply chain. So one day that, my son can hopefully make a go at this being in farming, which is also hard too, because I report every day on the ups and downs on the ag sector. And so that's also really hard to say, yes, go fly, but be careful,
Yeah,
because, it's challenging. But also so rewarding. And, that is probably, why I do what I do every day, is just to see rural America just be lifted up and succeed.
I love that. And I couldn't agree with you more. That is awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. What a great conversation. And I learned a lot.
Well, it was a delight to be with you on behalf of CoBank. Looking forward to seeing many new and familiar faces at this year's Women in Ag event.
Yes, me too. And thanks to all who are watching or listening. If you want to learn more, the links are provided in the show notes. Be sure to check out Jacqui's upcoming panel on sustainable aviation fuels at the Women in Agribusiness Summit this September in Orlando. You definitely don't want to miss it. Also, don't forget to subscribe to North American Egg Spotlight on Spotify, Apple, Amazon Listen Notes, or if you prefer video, you can find us on Rumble, or really wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like this episode, I would love it if you shared it. And have a great day.